Maybe don't know.
This time, next time to build. This 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 time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I am your host, Chris Hampton. Welcome to episode 27 of the Power Company Podcast, brought to you by PowerCompanyClimbing.com. I am out here in sunny and beautiful Waco Tanks, Texas. I'm here to MC the Waco Rock Rodeo, which starts officially tomorrow. And by the time you're hearing this, it'll be officially today. So if you're listening to this on your way to Waco, come and say hi. I'll be the guy with the microphone and the loud voice all weekend long at the Rock Ranch. And, I wanted to get this out to you guys before the rodeo started because I know I'll be swamped. And I know that you guys all got spoiled. I mean, we were doing an episode a week leading up until the new year. And since then, we've just been doing a couple a month. So I know you got spoiled. I did a little too, frankly. And, I want to right that ship. So I'll make a deal with you guys. We are currently $3 a month away from our next goal of $100 per month on our Patreon page. And that means that you just pledge a certain amount per month. Could be $1. If 3 of you do $1, we'll reach our $100 goal. And on the page, it says that we can guarantee 2 podcasts a month once we reach that. But I'll go ahead and say that I'll guarantee 3. Because, I'm already doing 2. So might as well step it up if you guys do. Yeah, that's patreon.com/powercompanypodcast. So please go check that out. Also, go to iTunes, leave some reviews and ratings. You guys have been great about that, and I really, really hugely appreciate it. And I just wanted to read a couple of reviews from some good friends of mine who are also out here in Waco. Titled Best in the Game from Johnny Snaps Wesley, a.k.a. Johnny Lightning. Photographer extraordinaire. If you aren't following him on Instagram, Lightning Snaps, you should be. He says, listening to this podcast is so beneficial for my climbing that I'm not even sure I need to train anymore. I measured my forearms after listening to the episode with Drew Mack, and they grew 2 inches in circumference. After the Arno episode, I resided in this new Zen space that allows me to literally float a few inches off the ground, but only if I choose to. That's a fact, actually. I've seen Johnny Lightning float. He's quite good at it, actually. And the second one I want to read from Johnny's significant other and, frankly, better half, let's just be honest, Hannah Dwyer, says, titled, Lost My Boyfriend to This Podcast. And she says, my boo is bad enough at listening normally, but when a new power company comes out, Bay is completely unreachable. The worst part is, the PCast is so good, I can't even get mad. Thanks, Hannah. Thanks, Johnny. I appreciate you guys. You guys go to iTunes, leave ratings and reviews, or go to patreon.com/powercompanypodcast and pledge some hard-earned monies. We'll make it worth your while. I'm just going to go ahead and get on with this thing because I've got a great conversation with our strength and conditioning coach and good friend, Paul Corsaro. And we're talking about why form matters in both your strength training and in your climbing training and really in your performance and everything you do. Why form, why breathing, why all that matters. So I'm going to go ahead and let Paul take it away.
Maybe don't know.
This time. If you're not being mindful about doing things correctly and keeping good, safe form, proper alignment in your joints, compromising form to put up bigger numbers doesn't mean you got stronger at all. This time power. This time to build power. This time to build power. This time to build power.
Yeah, and it'll be cool because I'm actually heading out there, and there's actually been some climbing development that's going on out there. I was able to do a little bit of sport climbing. I was last out there. Really cool setting, and there's a bouldering competition happening.
While you're going to be there?
While I'm there. It's the last day I'm there, and my flight's in the late late evening, so I don't know if I'll be able to do the actual bouldering competition.
Yeah.
But I'm going out there to help tag up the boulders, and they're doing kind of a Triple Crown style thing. So
Oh, that's really cool.
I'm really excited. I mean, there's Instagram accounts out there, Bouldering Hawaii, a couple other ones, but there's
the
some
photos from your sport climbing looked cool.
Yeah, it was the setting was pretty unbelievable. Cool, solid, blobby lava rock with really cryptic sequences on the beach with the breeze blowing through.
Yeah, and you just like hooked up with some people on the interwebs, right?
Yeah, I reached out to, again, that Bouldering Hawaii account. It's a guy named Matt Ludi, super friendly. I sent him just an Instagram message out of the blue and kind of asked about some beta for climbing out there, and his response was, yeah, we're heading out these days. Here's a phone number. Come climb with us.
Oh, man, that's the best.
And it was great.
That's one of the coolest things about this community, for sure.
Absolutely.
That happens again and again and again.
Yep.
It's really cool to see.
Yep. And people who put time into developing and spend their money and time looking for stuff, they're super stoked to share it usually, and we're lucky to have those people out there. So, Matt, if you listen to this, thanks for hooking me up. All the people I met out there, I'm excited to meet more of you. It'll be a good time.
Awesome. Shout out Matt Ludi, is that his
Yes.
name? Ludi?
Yes.
Cool. Shout out, Matt. So what we're going to talk about today, among other things, is why form is important, specifically when you're strength training. I see a lot of dudes, and really, frankly, I kind of came from this background originally where you're really focused on the weight, sort of similar in climbing to how you're super focused on the numbers. And that becomes the most important part of it. And then they compromise their form just to throw up bigger numbers, and that's a big mistake. And I think we should just talk about why. Because I think a lot of people don't even understand it. They're just like, well, but I'm lifting heavier.
Yeah.
And so yeah, let's dig into that.
Yeah. So I guess the first thing to think about there is you just got to consider you got your short-term viewpoint and your long-term viewpoint. In short-term, yes, maybe this next session or the session after that, you'll be able to lift a little bit heavier. But if you're not being mindful about doing things correctly and keeping good, safe form, proper alignment in your joints, you're going to increase in your ability or your the numbers you put up. I won't say strength, because I think compromising form to put up bigger numbers doesn't mean you got stronger at all.
Sure.
But
good
you'll
point.
increase in your, I guess, measurable results shortly, but that's going to lead to either plateau, overtraining, or you're getting hurt, and then you're going to have to back off and start all over again and kind of not really have gone anywhere. Where if you take the long-term viewpoint and just be a little bit more patient, own your weight, own the weight you're working with, hopefully that injury or that plateau doesn't happen, and you can keep slowly chipping your weight up, chipping your performance up over time, and your long-term results are going to be much more significant and much more sustainable than just trying to add another plate on and just getting it up off the ground any way you can.
Yeah, and I think that was a cool point that you made. And to kind of unpack that a little bit in climbing terms for people out there who are like, well, I put up a bigger number, of course I got stronger. I think maybe it's like if you're looking at a boulder problem in the gym and say it's this random V5 in the gym and you can't do the move off of the sloper. So instead you mono the bolt hole and then you can do the problem. It doesn't mean you got better. You didn't improve, and that's how you did the problem. All you did was compromise, the correct way to do the problem, and then you were able to do it. Correct. But you didn't get any stronger.
Right.
And that's basically what you're saying.
Yes, yeah. It's important to figure out the most efficient way to do something, but looking at the long-term view of things, once you do that next problem or you lift that next weight, you're automatically, or next amount of weight you lift, you're automatically going to look at the next thing. What's the next step? And if you weren't sustainable or reasonable in how you achieved the previous step, you really haven't moved down the path towards the next step.
Right. Like on the next problem, you're going to get a more shallow bolt hole.
Yeah.
It's just not going to work.
Yeah. Not sustainable.
Yeah, totally. And I think a lot of people don't necessarily understand that. And then they end up just bailing. Yeah. Like I got stronger. I got to this point. All right, I'm done.
Yeah.
And they just move on to whatever else. I don't need to get stronger anymore because I did this amount of weight.
Right.
I think that's a big mistake. So injury-wise, you mentioned injuries in there.
Yeah, so good form. A lot of the reasons there are accepted forms for certain movements. Let's just say, take a deadlift, for example.
Yep.
Good form in deadlift, at the very base, I mean, you can dive. We could have a 3-hour podcast about deadlift technique.
Sure. Yep.
And you had a really great one with Steve and Charlie about deadlift
yep.
technique. That's a great one. Check it out if you haven't listened to it. But basic deadlift technique from a very broad brush. You want to hinge with your hips, reach back with your hips, keep your back straight. You're not arching or flexing extensively in either direction, and wedging your hips through the ground to stand up. Basic deadlift form. Mechanically, it's not the most efficient way to pick it up, but
Right.
because it's inefficient doesn't mean not safe. Inefficient requires you and your body to generate enough tension to get it off the ground, where the more efficient way to get it off the ground, you don't have to generate as much tension, but you're going to flex at your lumbar spine. You may lose your shoulder packing.
Right.
You may squat it. And
Yep. You're going to bend a bunch at your knees.
Yeah. And just, sure, you may get it up that one time, but I'll take 1 rep, done well, bending where I'm supposed to and not bending where I'm not supposed to, then 10 reps, bending where I'm not supposed to, and
Yeah, for sure.
blowing out a disc.
So the goal isn't the weight. That's
Right.
what you're saying. The goal is to do a good hinge pattern with a sufficient amount of resistance.
Absolutely. And I make it very obvious that I'm a big fan of kettlebells. They're not the only tool, but one of the things I really like about kettlebells is they're big jumps in weight. It's usually 4 to 8 kilograms in a jump. That's that's around 16 pounds ish. I'm not that great at math, but
Yeah, me neither.
so you're forced to work with the same weight for a long amount of time. Like you're not throwing a little 2.5 pound plate at the end of the bar and trying to do a little bit more. You're really forced to own the movement.
Yep.
Dial in some of the more subtle aspects of that movement, and over time you put in a lot of reps, a lot of movements with a certain weight, and then you're able to access that new weight. But it kind of curtails the, hey, what's the next step? How am I going to add a little bit more weight? How am I going to...
Yeah, totally. Because you're going to, if you're trying Turkish get-ups with 16 pounds more than what you just struggled on, you're probably going to drop it on your face.
Yeah. And no one wins in that situation.
Yeah, nobody.
Best case scenario is you're going to the hospital.
Yeah. And, that's something that kind of threw me off when I first got involved with kettlebells was that big jump in weight. Because I came from that like high school weightlifting background where you're trying to add a pound on each week to your bench press, and it really threw me off. But what it did was force me to really focus on making, really owning that bell, like you put it, and making my form absolutely perfect. And then once I was going down that rabbit hole, it became obvious how applicable to climbing keeping good form was. And I think that's hugely important. Even if you don't want to listen to you're going to hurt yourself or anything else, as a climber, really that's the best transfer you're going to get is by focusing on that form. And you and I were just talking about Josh Waitskin and his concept of smaller circles, making smaller circles. Talk to me about that, how it relates to form and really dialing in your form.
So Josh Waitskin wrote a book called The Art of Learning that was super influential in how I kind of view training as a whole. It's a great book. You should check it out if you are interested in stuff like this.
Yeah,
but
Nate and I both recommend that book all the time. So.
It's incredible. Making smaller circles, it takes a movement, skill, anything really. We'll just look at the deadlift again, just because we'll kind of stay consistent with our examples.
And that's the one people know nowadays.
Right.
Yeah.
So, you've got your basic circle. Did I lift the weight off the ground? Now, let's take it a little bit deeper. Did I reach back with my hips? Was I driving through my hips? Okay, I did that. Let's make the circle a little bit smaller. Was I driving through my heels, or was I rocking into the balls of my feet? even make the circle a little bit smaller? Was I feeling my whole foot instead of just pushing with my heels?
Right.
And you can just kind of get deeper and deeper, but this act of drawing smaller circles or kind of zeroing in on different facets of movement really help you be mindful about your movement technique and how you're performing a movement instead of just worrying about the end result. And by being mindful of the subtle nuances of a movement, you learn a lot of lessons that way. And a lot of these lessons you can apply to something wildly different than what you're doing at the time. And all these lessons and skills you learn and concepts that you can take, concepts are a lot better than just a movement because they can apply to different things. And a lot of concepts are kind of hidden at first. So by zeroing in and focusing on subtle details, there's always something more to learn.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like you look at the little minor details, and that might open up the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, that's an interesting way to look at it, and I think you're right. And that's at the heart of it for me. That's where strength training and climbing really overlap. You know, I know people do it because they want to get stronger, but I think it's also a really great way to learn how to make smaller circles in a less complicated environment than rock climbing.
Absolutely, and especially when you're training by yourself, or even in a gym where you're kind of working your own routine. There's other people doing stuff. It's way different than working on a boulder where there's 15 other people either waiting their turn or watching you or yelling at you to breathe or something like that. And you can take the mental skills of dialing into your movement and seeing where you can improve just a little bit more. And once you've got, because everything takes reps. Lifting weights, you got to put the reps in picking the bar up. Climbing, you got to get the reps in climbing and doing these movements. And you got to get mental reps of practicing the abstract skill behind that, of being aware of how you're moving and finding finer details in your movement. So by being able to perform those mental repetitions of making smaller circles in a, like you said, a less complicated environment, it's going to be easier to do that in a performance environment, or you're outside climbing with your friends, or you're trying your project and you're getting frustrated. You can kind of switch gears and think back more on making smaller circles instead of worrying about the end result and getting mad because you did the same thing 3 times in a row and you're punting off boulders. And
which all of us do.
100%.
You know, and truly, it's things like, you know, refining the Turkish get-up. You know, whenever I program in Turkish get-ups, I always start my summary of that workout with treat the Turkish get-up like a difficult boulder problem. Like, you need to learn every little part of it, make every little part perfect before you're able to do the whole thing.
Absolutely.
You know, and just like a boulder problem, you can do the first half of a Turkish get-up great, and then the second half might fall to shit. And that's okay, because you're still learning. Right. You know, and that's something that's I was really impressed by watching you coach a couple of weeks ago. One of our clients, Chris, came into town, and you coached him through a session with kettlebells. And one of the things I was both surprised by and impressed by was that you definitely dug into the technique, but even when it was obvious to me that there were still some technique flaws that I might have gotten wrapped up in, you just made the concept clear that we just have to keep improving this, and then you would, good job, and you'd move on. But you made it clear to him that form and technique is this ever-evolving thing. Yeah,
you're never truly done learning a movement.
Yeah, and I don't think we need to beat ourselves up over, oh, my form was bad, that one sucked, that one didn't count. You know, it's nothing like that. And when I'm coaching from now on, I don't need to harp on every little problem, because frankly, just like on a boulder problem, you can't learn 12 things at once. You can't do it while you're lifting either.
Yeah. And as a coach, I used to do that. Like, I was the number one, I guess, proponent of, hey, we got to do this perfect. And, hey, you did this rep, you need to fix this, and this. And I just realized people would shut down. Like, they either shut down because they had to think about too much, or they felt they were just bad at it. I mean, that'll happen. You'll see people get real negative real quick if they're just like, oh, I did all these things wrong. And when you go into something with a negative mindset, it's really hard to get something positive out of it. And I've just found I've had a lot more success just maybe backing off a little bit and just doing a couple reps and just, zeroing in, fixing the big stuff first.
Yep.
Focus on this big underlying concept. Okay, that's pretty good. Here's how we can make it a little bit better. And It's never like, hey, you did this wrong. You need to fix this. Like, hey, we need to make this just, how do you make it a little bit better? How do you refine it that 1%? Get a little bit better each time.
Yeah, totally. It's a never-ending process, really. And I've kind of battled with this idea for quite a while now, partially because I'm my own devil's advocate a lot of the time. I think that's how I'm able to be successful in things, is because I challenge myself. And with this remote training, I've often questioned, should I be asking people to do these things if I don't know they're doing them perfectly? But then the other side of me is like, well, you know what? When you were learning to lift, you didn't have a clue if you were doing everything perfectly. And there's a lot more resources out there now to learn than there were back then.
Yeah.
They can just Google it from wherever they're working out.
Internet's pretty cool.
And we provide videos and descriptions and everything else. So on one side, I feel okay with it. On the other side, I'm like, I don't know if I should be doing this, But watching you coach that way and just instilling that it's a process that you should keep thinking about, that makes me feel quite a bit better about asking people to do some frankly simple things. Yeah. And as long as they're not hurting themselves. And then this is something you say pretty often. I've heard you say it to Annalisa when she was talking about swings. Is it hurting your back? And she said no. And you were like, well, then you're doing it right. We could probably fix it. We can make it a little better, but you're doing it right.
Yeah. And outside of like the main kind of cardinal, I guess probably the biggest cardinal rule in strength training, looking at the whole body, is don't flex or extend your spine, your lower back, your lumbar spine under load.
Yeah.
If you can keep that stable, you can build off of that. But if something's hurting or you're loading your back super flexed or extended more than you can handle, and I'm talking and thinking as I talk, and of course there's always exceptions to every rule.
The Jefferson curl.
That's exactly what popped into my head.
Coach Summers made popular. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a really good exercise. You just got to be very careful with it.
Yeah.
It's a really good exercise. You got to be careful with it. And there's obviously exceptions to every rule, but when I train people, I really like to keep a stable spine. I don't like to load it. And that's my cardinal guideline for almost every strength movement I do, whether it's an overhead press, because you've seen those people press an overhead. They get that crazy arch in the back. They throw their hips forward. And I mean, if you think about it, you've got all that weight coming down on top of your spinal column. And if your lower back's in front of your upper back, all that pressure's coming down on the back of your vertebrae, totally. Stressing those discs. So once you can control your spine and move right around without relying on the support of pressing vertebrae together, and it's not hurting, you're good. And then it's time to start refining and getting a little bit better.
Yeah. Even, that brings me to another idea, the thought of this Jefferson curl and being in somewhat of a compromised position while you're training. When it comes to climbing, things like the closed crimp, it's popular, and I'm guilty of saying that you shouldn't train in a closed crimp position. And I think for most people, that's true. But I've trained in a closed crimp position because it's a weakness of mine. I'm not good at crimping down on things. So I need to train that to get better at it, but I do it really, really carefully.
Yeah.
And, like Coach Summers pointed out in the Tim Ferriss podcast, where I was first introduced to the Jefferson curl, was that you're going to get into that compromised position. Yeah. If you're a high-level gymnast, you're going to end up in that position.
Right.
So why not train and, gradually load that position so that you can withstand it once you're there. And I think that's a super important thing to note, is that it has to be super gradual and it has to be specific to you.
Right.
Not everybody needs to be doing Jefferson curls. And not everyone needs to be close crimping when they train.
I agree.
So,
and yeah, especially when I think about how I strength train a lot of rock climbers, and if you watch people rock climb, the core and spine stay pretty straight for the most part when you're climbing. If you've got the adequate mobility in your hips, if your hips are super tight, you're gonna have to compensate somewhere else. But ideally, you want to keep the limit movement through your midsection. So ideally, I would stay out of training the spine in, flexor extended positions for a climber. And also a lot of the strength training I do for climbers, I really like to view as supplementary because, you're going to get better at climbing and make the biggest improvements in climbing by rock climbing.
Yep.
Totally. So I will never tell someone they need to, skip out on a climbing skill practice day to, you need to deadlift more weight or you need to do some weighted pull-ups.
Right. Again, there are always outliers. And as soon as you said I would never tell someone that, it was really funny because I just wrote into someone's plan. Even if you have to skip the climbing day, make sure you get these. But it's a client of mine who I've worked with for a long time, who we know that general overall body strength is his limiting factor.
Okay.
He's a really good rock climber. His overall body strength is the limiting factor. But for most people, that's not the case. Your technique is probably not good enough that you're even using the strength that you currently have available.
Right.
So getting stronger may not necessarily be the answer.
If you can
Everyone could continue getting stronger, for sure. No question about that. But it doesn't need to be your main focus, is what you're saying.
Right, because if you can only access a portion of your reserve of strength,
right,
because your technique's kind of that gatekeeper, that window's only that window's only a quarter of the way open. It doesn't matter how much the area behind that window, how big that is.
Right.
You can only get through that quarter. Your technique's going to open that window more. You'll be able to have access to that a lot better.
Yeah, totally. Man, there was just something I was thinking about. Oh, yeah. We were talking about compromised positions and training in those compromised positions, and that brought up another thought. You and I actually had a conversation about this last winter, and our conversation was surrounding some posts that our friend of the power company, Natasha Barnes, had posted, and I was just trying to make sense of things in my head. And she posts a lot about how you should be training in these correct postures and correct positions. And the thing that really got me thinking was a post about a resting position. You should be resting in this position. And I was like, I've never rested in my life in that position, and I'm really good at resting, so this is bullshit, But then when I talked to you about it, it started to make a little more sense that it's a good idea to train in those positions. And then when athletes perform almost across the board, whether it's weightlifters or football players or whatever, they almost always go into compromising positions. So if I'm on red point and I need to, I can't hold the square, shoulders back position for resting, and I need to sag onto my connective tissue to get some back, that's what I'm going to do. But I think training to be better at that position is what Natasha was getting at and what you sort of explained to me. Am I looking at that the right way now?
Absolutely. If you think
by the way, shout out Natasha.
Yeah, for sure. Great stuff. If you think about performance versus training, training's a very controlled setting where you're trying to get better and improve the qualities you have that you can utilize in a performance situation. And in a performance situation, all the rules are out the window. You want to get to the top of the climb. You want to top out the boulder. You want to clip the chains on the anchor. A powerlifter wants to deadlift an insane amount of weight. And you watch videos of some super high-level powerlifters deadlifting a lot of weight, and some of them are ugly, but they still get a good lift at the end. And for the most part, one lift with a little bit sketchy form, if you're successful and it doesn't hurt, awesome. You did it. You put it down, move on to the next weight, continue your competition. Say you're at a rest, you're hanging off your shoulders, you're not going to get hurt. but you recover more than trying to keep your lats packed, your shoulders down. You're
Right.
saving energy, and you go and clip the chains. That's the goal.
Right.
But in training, where you can be a lot more controlled in your movements and really focus on good technique, and you're doing these repetitions in training a lot more than you're doing in a performance setting. You're resting more in a performance setting. Lifters, it's one attempt. You're not doing a set of 5.
Right.
And the difference in the load is just exponential there.
Yeah, no doubt.
So obviously, doing something poorly 20 times is going to be the probability of getting hurt is much higher there than doing it one time. And you train to get better at performance. So yeah, do what you need to do to be successful. But when you can control your training, you can get stronger in these more mechanically inefficient positions to build that strength, so you can be more efficient, while you're resting.
Yeah,
so yeah,
totally.
It's exactly, yeah. Being mechanically inefficient forces you to create more tension and keep everything stronger and safer.
Yep.
So you can afford to be inefficient. You can afford to be more efficient when you're trying to actually do the task.
Right. And if I get better at that, what might be more mechanically inefficient, if I get better at that position through training and it's a safer position, then chances are on, 3 of the rests on my mega proj, I can keep that safer position, and it's just at the last rest where I need to go into that less safe position to get back what I need, and then I finish the route. Just like a power lifter deadlifting one somewhat sloppy rep.
Yeah, just getting it up. And if you think about at a rest, especially in the climbing rest, when you're shaking out, the last thing you really want to be thinking about is, I need to keep my lats tight. I need to keep my shoulders packed. You need to breathe, get your heart rate down, get ready for the next section of rock climbing.
Yeah, that's why I was having trouble with Natasha's posts in my head, because I just, I'm like, I would never do that. I can't imagine ever doing that. But I was also looking at it through the lens of someone who's trained endurance extensively and almost never rests while I'm training anymore. Right. So when I looked at a resting position, I'm like, that's a position I only see in performance, and I would never think about that.
Yeah. And I
get it now.
And that's an interesting point too, because there's been a lot of kind of discussion about the same kind of shoulder position in hanging too.
Right.
So like hangboard training and finger training about shoulder position. I completely agree. You should keep your shoulders down and packed when you're hanging. And that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yep. Yeah, totally. And there are going to be times when, let's look at campusing, for example. You don't want a campus where you hit the next rung and your shoulder, you just land on your connective tissue.
Shoulder goes past your ear.
Yeah, you don't want that to happen when you're campusing, but it's going to happen on a route or a boulder problem, most likely. The key is you're trying to get better at doing it in a controlled way, so that you can then apply that controlled way to your performance time, so that that's less likely that's going to happen while you're outperforming. Yeah. We're trying to train so we can be better at this for a long time, right?
Exactly.
Not just so we can do the next boulder problem.
Yeah. I think the majority of climbers out there would like to continue climbing for the rest of their life. I know I would.
Yeah, I hope so. Yeah.
But it's one of my favorite quotes. It's kind of over the top, but being strong makes you harder to kill. But going back on that, strength training correctly makes you more resilient. And so, keeping proper alignment when you're training helps you be more resilient and not just kind of explode everywhere the second you get out of alignment in a performance setting.
Totally. So back on, people sort of self-coaching, are there things people can think about while they're, just trying to keep good form themselves, just in general? It doesn't have to be on a specific exercise, just concepts or ideas that people should watch out for.
I would always try and keep some core tension and think about really driving, especially on any lifts where you're picking the weight off the ground or squatting or something like that. Less about standing up with the weight and more about pushing the ground away. Because a lot of times people will subconsciously think about, in a deadlift, we'll just keep using that example. If I want to pick the weight up, I'm going to arch my back just because I want to get it off the ground and get my head as far away from the ground as possible.
Right.
Is going to make us feel like we're getting the weight up higher, but we're really getting into that threatening position we talked about before. Well, if we think about, I'm going to keep everything tight and strong in my upper body and just push the ground away, you're going to be much more likely to keep your spine straight, generate the force through the muscle groups we want to develop by training the deadlift instead of relying on more of our stabilizers and compensating through that. And then just trying to keep some core tension when we're lifting.
That's what I was about to ask. Do you suggest keeping the core tight through all lifts?
For the most part, yes.
Yeah.
Again, there's always exceptions, but yes, I'd say that. And instead of really thinking about squeezing my abs, I like to think about, contracting my glutes, squeezing my glutes together, because that leads to a greater activation in your core. When I'm doing an overhead press, trying to crush the handle of the bell or the bar, just that concept of irradiation. The more tension we can generate throughout our entire body, everything's going to contract a lot tighter, a lot stronger.
Yeah, totally. And I had a funny conversation with my friend Les, whose dining room we're sitting in recording right now. So thanks, Les, for letting us use your house. And I've been working with Les for a little while, and one of the core workouts I have him doing includes some bird dog crunches, and he was doing them with his girlfriend Kalina, and he was like battling it out, and she's just cruising through them. Like, are these hard for you? Like, what's the problem? And what the difference was is Les really took to heart the idea of keeping your core super tight and making everything really controlled and tight, rather than just, let's see how many of these I can do, you know? And Kalina was still in that mindset of, I'm going to relax everything else as much as possible and just do this motion. Yeah. Sort of, I don't know, aerobics style or something. And, I think that's a big mistake that people make in their, maybe it's not exactly form, but maybe it is. And like with planks, I think are a really great example.
I agree completely. And what I'm looking for in a plank is, obviously a cardinal rule, keeping that back straight. A lot of people will say, hey, I can hold a plank for 5 minutes. And you watch them hold their plank, and after 10 seconds, they look like a U. Their belly's sagging to the ground.
They think because they haven't fallen that they're still holding.
And if you can hold a plank longer than 15 seconds, you need to try harder. Yeah. You need to try and pull your elbows to your toes, try and compress the ground between those elbows and toes, squeeze your butt as hard as you can.
Yep.
And that'll feel way different. Crush your fists, too. That's another really good one that people don't think about. Squeeze your hands together as hard as you possibly can. That's going to lead to greater tension generated through the rest of the body. And that plank's going to feel a lot different if you haven't tried that.
Yep. And that's all sort of based on Pavel's, at least that's where I first heard of irradiation.
Yeah, kind of those hard style tension techniques.
Yep. And we use a lot of these irradiation techniques in our climbing drills, specifically for tension. Yeah. So let's just talk about irradiation for a second, just so if people think they, have really dialed in this move or this exercise, and they're like, oh, my form's the best it could ever be, I need to step up and weight. I think irradiation is a good thing to start thinking about, because it can make that exercise feel a hell of a lot harder.
Absolutely.
And it can, produce more force.
Yeah.
I think you just do as soon as you start practicing it. So let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So irradiation. So in that plank, we were talking about squeezing, just making as tight as fist as possible. In a press, thinking about when you're pressing the bell or bar overhead. Let's just take a kettlebell, for example. So we're doing a one-arm press. I'm pressing the bell with my right hand. I'm trying to crush the handle of the bell into dust with my right hand. But also with my left hand, I'm making that fist as well.
Right. So what's the theory behind this? Why do it?
It's a nervous system thing. By trying to generate as much force through your hands, that's going to travel up, lead to a better contraction of the rotator cuff muscles, and it's kind of a feed forward mechanism. So if you're trying to generate more tension somewhere other than where you're trying to lift, because obviously with the part of your body you're trying to do the actual exercise with, even though we want to focus on form a lot, subconsciously we want to be successful in the lift. So really being conscious about generating as much tension somewhere else, that's going to feed forward into more tension on the working appendage. And it's kind of interesting because there's studies that have shown even when people are injured and they can't, say you've blown out your right shoulder and you can't lift with your with that arm that's hurt, strength training the other arm will lead to a nervous system increase in strength on the injured arm.
I've heard this before.
The body's connected, so trying to treat the body as just the Frankenstein approach, where it's just multiple parts just kind of stitched together, you could be missing out on a lot of opportunities to get stronger in situations where you can't.
Yeah, I think so for sure.
Yeah.
And, Pavel does a really good job of explaining it that sort of made it make sense to me. And this is the description I use for a lot of my clients that, it's all about all the muscles are connected and, creating force in one muscle is going to help the force in the next one. And for instance, if you're trying to make a fist and squeeze your fist as hard as you can, unless you're starting to flex your forearm and then starting to flex your bicep and starting to flex your shoulder, and then it goes down into your pec and into your lats, unless all those things get tight, you're still not making the tightest fist you can.
Right.
And I think that just applies to whatever. Yeah. And if you use that as part of your training, you're inevitably going to get stronger.
Absolutely. And a good example of that outside of training, think about when you're trying to open a jar that's stuck together. Think about what you naturally do. You squeeze the lid. Right. You don't stand straight up and you're relaxed everywhere else. You're hunched over
other than cussing, you mean?
Yeah. Well, of course. You got to let those words fly. But you're hunched over that thing and you're using your whole body to open that. Your shoulders are tight. You're digging your feet into the ground.
Yeah, totally.
It's really helpful to generate a lot of force by focusing on the whole body as a unit instead of just the respective parts that you may think are doing all the work, because they're not.
Yeah, maybe that's all we need as a strength training tool, are just really tight
really
jars.
Stuck lids.
Yeah.
It could be something fun to play around with.
Yeah, so we apply that to climbing because that's how climbing moves work. If you're trying the hardest boulder problem you've ever done, your whole body is tired in 3 or 4 moves.
Yep.
And that's because you're not trying to hold a 5-minute long plank.
Yeah.
You can't be sloppy and relax and still expect the hardest move you've ever done to work.
It's not going to.
So you have to get good at being super tight all the time and being able to engage all these muscles while remaining in good form.
Yeah.
To make hard moves work.
Yep.
And that's why we practice it strength training.
Yep, and those are all great examples of where we really want to, generate as much force as we can, really just try and almost overkill the force. There's one example where I'd probably, because it is important to keep that kind of mid-level tension, so when we're trying to walk, we're not trying to squeeze everything as hard as we can so we don't get hurt. Yeah. And carries are a great example to kind of practice that, working on keeping the hips aligned, keeping some gentle tension through the core.
Yeah.
And just, working through our gait and keeping everything aligned, and we don't have to hold our breath and crush the other fist and squeeze as hard as we can to walk with something. But for the most part, when you're lifting, you want to overkill with the tension.
Yep, and I'm glad you just said hold your breath, because that's kind of the next level, I think, of practicing your radiation through something like a hard style plank. I try to get people to, once they feel like they're doing a good job of tensing up everything, almost across the board, they're holding their breath. And then I cue them to breathe. Try to breathe through those 10 seconds of holding this hard style plank. And it's a lot harder than it sounds.
Oh, yeah.
Do you feel like breathing is a part of good form? Where does that fall?
Absolutely. So breathing correctly, using your diaphragm, pulling that diaphragm down, which allows the lungs to inflate by creating that negative pressure in the lungs. That's how we should breathe. A lot of times, and this is one of my big assessment points when someone comes in, is I'll have them just take a breath. And more often than not, you'll see the shoulders raise, you'll see the traps activate, and they'll breathe in what seems to be their chest.
Right.
And that's indicates some, I don't want to say core dysfunction, but maybe just some basic motor patterning that can be fixed really quick, or it might be really hard for people to do that. But if we're using our diaphragm to breathe correctly, that means our diaphragm and pelvic floor are facing each other, and that makes sure our midsection is aligned. A lot of times you're breathing up above, or you're expanding in your chest, your ribs flare out, and now you don't have that pressurized canister to kind of stabilize through your midsection.
Right.
But so once you've got that down, so just going back to basic breathing, being able to do that right, adding that to any core exercise, that's just going to make it so much more applicable to everything else, and you're going to be a lot safer, and you're being a lot stronger. If you're holding your breath through something, you're kind of trying to survive through that movement.
Yeah.
You're not really adapting through that movement. Greg Cook says that if you're holding your breath, you're just trying to survive a movement, or you don't own that movement. So yeah, I'll cue the plank. It's that's how I do a lot of my core exercises. I don't necessarily use time. I'll do it for breath. It's like, hey, you're going to hold this plank for 5 breaths.
Yep. That's a lot of the core ebook that Nate and I are working on. We're working with breaths. And that was a new concept for me, and I really dig it.
It's cool. And actually, I got that from my the guy I work with at Scenic City Strength and Fitness, Matt Green. He's been a mentor to me in a lot of ways. And that was the first time I'd ever seen that. And then as I started learning more, it makes so much sense to me.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can use that as a way to even generate more tension by, once you've got that basic breathing down, you can hold a plank, generating that tension, breathing correctly into your abdomen. Every time you exhale longer than you think you can, because you've got more air in there. You'll feel your abs tighten up.
Yep.
You'll feel that tension rise, and then the goal will be to try and keep that tension and try and breathe behind that. And every time you exhale, just try and ratchet up that tension a little more.
Okay.
And after 5 breaths, you'll be squeezing a lot harder than you think you could have if you were just I'm squeezing as hard as I can. I'm generating that tension. Okay, breathe and ratchet it up each breath.
Yep. And I think practicing that while you're training is a good way to not get into unhealthy, stressful breathing while you're performing.
Absolutely.
And breathing is a huge part of your performance. It's a huge part of how strong you feel, how strong you are. Mm-hmm. Are there specific ways people should, is there a way to simplify how they're breathing? Is it in through the nose, out through the mouth? Is it, I don't know.
When we're working on, trying to reprogram a breathing pattern that needs a little bit of work, I'll have people lay on the ground, put their forehead on the back of their hands.
Okay.
And so when they inhale, they're face down on the ground?
Yes.
Okay. So when they breathe in, they want to try and feel their belly push into the ground. Okay. And that's the first step, feeling that. And it is easier if you really think about breathing in through your nose instead of your mouth, than exhaling through your mouth. It gets more diaphragm action that way subconsciously. You don't have to think about, okay, how do I do this? It seems to work a lot better for a lot of people.
And I was listening to a podcast about breathing, and the woman, I can't recall her name, said that if you breathe in through your mouth, it almost always feels stressful.
Yeah.
And if you breathe in through your nose, it feels relaxing. And I don't know if it's just because she told me that's how I feel when I try it, but it totally is. It feels more panicked when I'm breathing through my mouth, and it feels much more relaxing through my nose.
Yeah, and I don't know what the science is behind this, but if you just think about it, and I'm just straight up speculating here, so I could be 100%
we
wrong.
do a lot of that.
I reserve the right to be wrong and change my mind in the future. But if you think about it, if we're breathing through our mouth, most of the times it's because we need more air because we're in a stressful situation. So
Right.
there's a chance we could be hardwired for that, where, hey, I need to run, and way back in the past, I need to run away from this lion. Obviously, I'm not going to run with my mouth closed, breathing deep through my nose. I'm getting as much air in my lungs as possible.
Yep.
So that could be a hardwired thing where, hey, I'm taking a big deep breath through my mouth. My body's going to detect, hey, this could be an issue.
Yep.
We need to go fight or flight.
Yeah,
we need
totally.
To get
Could
that sympathetic nervous system up and go.
Or it's just because the lady told me that's how I'm going to feel.
Yep. And,
one of the two.
Yeah, or that too. Yeah, exactly. But that's interesting. So yeah, I really, breathing in through the nose is a great way to start. And you think about, yoga or meditation all the time. How are you supposed to breathe in that?
Right.
It's through the nose.
Yep.
And
I totally sidelined you though. We're face down on the ground.
Oh yeah.
Forehead on our backs of our hands. Breathing through your nose. You should feel it kind of, your belly's.
Pressing into the ground. And that would be step 1. And then eventually, as that gets more and more comfortable, you'd want to start getting that expansion in the sides too.
Okay. Like you said, canister earlier.
Yeah,
That's that
canister,
same feeling, like it's a band all the way around
Yeah, and you want to expand 360 degrees around there. And
Okay.
one of the systems I use to help train a lot of people, we call it crocodile breathing. Just because you see crocodiles laying on the ground, their bellies expand.
Yeah, I
they go
never
out.
thought of that.
So,
Yeah,
and that
crocodiles breathe way better than you.
they do. They also got a lot bigger mouths too. But so those are the big things. That's a great way to start. Then you can kind of change into different positions. Lay on your back, one hand on your chest, one hand on your stomach, and then when you breathe in, you want your stomach hand to move, keeping your chest still. That's a great way to kind of tell and see where.
Yeah. And then do you eventually take these same, the same sort of breathing pattern into the movements? Is that the same thing you're looking for?
Yeah.
Later on.
Yeah,
Cool.
absolutely. Especially in core work, when I'm coaching someone, I'm watching, hey, say you're holding a plank for breaths. And I'm watching them and seeing where I'm seeing expansion there.
Yeah.
And if I see someone either start to hold their breath or their shoulders start moving, it's time to maybe cut that exercise and you're done with that set because the quality's gone.
Yep. And why does that breathing help? Like, I think I know where we're back to, but people are going to say, well, I can do it without breathing that way. I can hold this plank for 10 seconds and squeeze everything and breathe with my mouth, so.
I think that's outside.
I don't know what that is. Are we being robbed? Is that what's going on here? Les, your house is being robbed. Crazy noises. I don't know if you guys could hear that. Or maybe it was alien Christmas carolers.
There you go.
Yeah. But anyway, what's the point of doing that?
Do you hold your breath when you rock climb?
Do I?
Yeah.
On Golden Harvest, I do. No, I don't think you do. And I think that's, exactly what I'm thinking. Like, to perform your best, you need to breathe your best as well.
And training is a way of stressing the body to adapt, and you can control the level of stress in your training, physical stress, mechanical stress. And if you're able to kind of manage that and kind of stress your ability to breathe correctly, you're building up that ability to breathe correctly under stress. So in a performance situation, you don't automatically revert to that fight or flight, stressed breathing, or start holding your breath. You're able to kind of breathe a little bit better, keep everything in better alignment, and get better core activation through all that.
Yep. And I've seen you do this multiple times. And I actually was going to try it the other day, and I was like, I can't time this like Paul times it. But on multiple occasions, I've seen someone climbing, they're holding their breath, and you exhale while you're spotting. You make this big exhale, and that reminds them to breathe. And every single time you've done it, someone notices. Oftentimes it's the climber. When the climber's already noticed it and they're aware of it, people on the ground start noticing it, and they're like, oh, that was so cool. You breathed, and then she remembered to breathe. Or he, I remember a guy coming down off of a boulder the other day, and you did exactly that, and he came down, and he was like, thank you, that was great. I remembered to breathe as soon as you said it, or as soon as you breathed. I think that's really cool. That's a cool cue that maybe people could use, for their friends when they're holding their breath, and for themselves. It helps me to breathe because I remember that you would be standing down there breathing, like you would exhale.
The first time that happened to me was on a route at the Red River Gorge, a notoriously bouldery route, Stunning the Hog, where you have to try hard pretty much the whole route. It's like, 18 moves or something? Just boulder. You're bouldering. But Corey Hare.
Crazy.
I'm trying hard through a sequence there, and I just hear him from the ground doing that.
Yeah.
And then I relaxed and started breathing. I was like, whoa, that's awesome.
That's
and
really
knowing
interesting.
what I know now about how to cue and...
Was he doing it on purpose?
Yes, he did that to me, and I've always done that. So yeah, that's cool. That's all Corey Hare. Thank you, Corey.
Good job, Corey.
That was back when I was like 19 years old or something like that, and it stuck with me. But
it's a great technique, and it really shows what breathing can do.
Yeah.
And shows how easy it is to forget about it, because until I saw you do it, until I recognized that was so effective, even when I'm coaching, I'm not really paying attention to, are they holding their breath when they're trying these moves or trying this boulder? But now I pay much more attention to that.
And when you dig into, we kind of touched on it a little bit ago, but how breathing is linked to your stress response in your nervous system.
Yep.
When you stress breathe, you're breathing up high. That's your sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight response.
Right.
That deep belly breathing, that's more parasympathetic, which is more resting, more recovery. So obviously you want to do that deep breathing on a rest, on a route, so you can get into that recovery mode. But also going from a stress aspect, because it kind of works both ways. If you're stressed, you're going to revert to that breathing. Also breathing, the stress breathing, if you stress breathe first, it's going to lead to rising stress.
Right.
But also someone screaming at you to breathe isn't the most stress-free way to get you to remember how to breathe.
Yeah, Annalisa yells at me all the time that I sound panicked. Like when she's having a hard time, when I'm trying to help her, I sound panicked. And that's the other day Annalisa was, working on what became her hardest send the next session, but she was like, I need Paul here. I just need Paul here. Like she was not happy with my coaching at all. So yeah, you're right. That definitely breathing is a big part of your stress level and of your performance, and practicing that and making it part of the form that you should be really paying attention to and practicing in your strength training is hugely important.
Goes back to, little concepts you can pull in one discipline, you can apply to other disciplines very well. That
Totally.
seem wildly unrelated at first. Yep. It all connects.
Yeah, just to go right back to Josh Waitzkin, that's what that book that we kind of started with early in this conversation, The Art of Learning. He's a chess prodigy. He's a push hands, Tai Chi push hands world champion. He's
Jiu-Jitsu black belt.
Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He's just a brilliant learner. And that's what his entire book is about, taking things and making them concepts that you can apply to a lot of different parts of your life. And that's what we're talking about here, the form of strength training you can apply to climbing if you do it well.
Yes.
And I've heard Steve Bechtel say it. I don't know who said it first. I know I've heard it other places, but the way you do one thing is the way you do everything. And I think that's a good enough reason, if nothing else, to really pay attention to your form and your strength training.
Absolutely. Super important.
Yeah. All right, man. Thanks for sitting down with me again.
Anytime.
Man, I feel extremely fortunate to have Paul Corsaro as part of the team. He's Power Company Climbing strength and conditioning coach. He's also a good friend. And I've learned a ton from Paul. And honestly, I think that after listening to this interview and this conversation, I think that you guys will realize that you've got a lot to learn from Paul as well. So you can find him on the internets at cruxconditioning.com, where he's got a bunch of great blog posts. He does a bullet points and brews every week that pairs a good beer, which Paul is a beer connoisseur, with some of the training things he's been reading on the internet. And honestly, I don't know of a single other person who's as dedicated to learning about the art and science of strength and conditioning as Paul is. So again, I feel really extremely fortunate to have him on board. And if you haven't and you're interested, check out the Kettlebells for Climbers ebook that Paul and I put together. We'll also have that available through the app soon. And Paul will be coaching strength and conditioning plans through our app as well very, very soon. So if you're interested in that, please feel free to hit me up at powercompanyclimbing.com. And, until then, you can share us all over the internets. You can look for us on the Facebooks, the Pinterests, and the Instagrams. But you won't find us on the Twitter. We don't tweet. We scream like eagles.
This time, to build power. it's time to build.